webinar. I'm Barbara Slavin. I direct the Middle East Perspectives project here at Stimson. If you've been reading our content, or indeed anyone's content for the past week, you know we've been focused on one issue. The war touched off when Israel attacked Iranian nuclear, military, and other targets in Iran, and Iran retaliated with missile strikes on Israel. Hundreds of Iranians have been killed, and 24 Israelis have been killed, most of them civilians. And while we know how this war began, we can only speculate about how and when it ends. So, for the next hour, we're going to dissect the impact so far on Iran's nuclear program, the political fallout, the civilian toll, as well as the US role, and possible scenarios for ending the war or widening it. And for this, as always, we have a terrific panel. First up is Olli Heinonen, a distinguished fellow here at Stimson and a 27-year veteran of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, which is tasked with monitoring nuclear programs around the world. I've known Olli for many years and have benefited from his on-the-ground experience with the Iranian nuclear program. Next, Kelsey Davenport, Director for Nonproliferation Policy at the Arms Control Association. Kelsey is also a valued colleague, and she's a true expert on all things nuclear. She has been of great help in efforts over the years to try to devise diplomatic solutions to the Iranian nuclear issue. Next, my good friend Fatima Aman, who's written on Iranian, Afghan, and broader Middle East affairs for over 25 years. Her work has appeared here at Stimson and in Jane's Intelligence Review, among other publications, and she is a frequent commentator on BBC Persian. And last but definitely not least, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Chuck Freilich, a senior fellow at Israel's Institute for National Strategic Studies and a former Israeli deputy national security advisor, and I've admired his analyses for many years. You can find full bios of our speakers on our website. If you want to submit a question, please do it in the Q&A box on your Zoom screen, and I'll try to get to as many questions as I can. So, Olli, let me start with you. How much damage have the Israeli strikes done so far to Iranian nuclear facilities? Where is Iran's stockpile of 900 pounds of 60% enriched uranium? What are the chances that Iran has already diverted centrifuges or fissile material to an undisclosed location?
Thank you. When I look what has happened during last 1 week, I clearly see that Israel's work strikes are guided by risk assessment. The first step is to stop the production of new fissile material for nuclear weapons or other purposes, keeping in mind particularly the 60% enriched uranium, which doesn't seem to have any plausible use in Iranian civilian program. So then we look side by side quickly. Natanz, most likely devastating impact both the underground facilities and above ground. We see damage in the buildings above ground, but the shocks of bombing, cutting of electricity, cutting of air conditioning and cooling system have probably decimated the whole centrifuge hall. So it's not going to produce any high-enriched uranium anytime soon. Fordo, this is the crux of the matter at this point of time. There has been no visible strike in Fordo. It is the most capable facility to produce high-enriched uranium and weaponize that 60% enriched uranium which Iran has for 400 kilograms. It has the most powerful cascades, 10 cascades of IR6. They can turn such kind of material in a matter of a week or two to weapons-grade uranium hexafluoride. But that material is not yet a weapon. It needs still to be converted to uranium metal, alloy, machine, and then at the end assemble nuclear weapon. I come to that part of the story in 1 minute time. And then what can be done with the Fordo? People talk a lot about bunker busters. Yes, that's one option. The other option is just use the less robust ammunition and eliminate ventilation, electricity, entrances, cooling, access of the people. That will stop the production, and most likely will have some impact also the quality of centrifuges, if not entirely destroyed. Then certainly there are other options still, like a commando action, but that will be very difficult to do. But I think that it is probably still in someone's cards. Then let's go to Isfahan, which is where the uranium metals are handled and materials are converted. All facilities which I can see, which IAEA has also confirmed, which are able to do those activities have been practically eliminated for quite some time. And then this leads one more question. What, as you said in the beginning, what if there is a clandestine facility somewhere? Iran has material for that. And there is also track record that Iran has done it in past. This is the way four-door construction started in 2004. They have enough centrifuges to do it. One has also to remember that when IAEA established the inventory of centrifuges in 2016, it just counted the centrifuges. It didn't do it the way it was done in 2004, where the IAEA went to the production records, corroborated the information, consistency, not for every piece of centrifuge, but most critical parts, which are the rotating parts of the centrifuge. So there is a high possibility that such a facility can be constructed if Iran has so decided. It's not going to be big, about the size of that pilot enrichment plant above the ground in Natanz. So like a normal industrial small workshop. That would be sufficient to do both things. Convert it to uranium hexafluoride to 90%, make it to uranium metal alloy, and machine those components. Then comes the question, how long it will take. IAEA has a standard for timeliness, and it's 1 month for high-enriched uranium. And that 1 month, which was established in 1960s as a guideline, is enough time to convert natural uranium to high-enriched uranium, turn it to uranium metal components, and machine those. This is probably the risk assessment which has been driving Israel and some other countries in this issue. That time is of essence. People talk about half a year, 1 year, 2 years, but one has to keep in mind the statement of Salehi and Karachi. What if this all has already been done? Everything is on the shelf, high explosives, design and manufactured re-entry vehicle for the missile, explosives, electronics, guiding system. And the only piece which is missing are those metal pieces. Then we are talking much shorter time. But this is the risk assessment, and this information is not available in the public. Let's be honest. I don't think that any of the parties want Iran to know exactly what they know and where they are. And then last but not the least.
Go ahead, but I just wanted to interject, and it's a question also for Chuck later. Given how much Israel has learned about the Iranian program, given the penetration of Iranian intelligence, wouldn't we know if Iran had actually begun weaponization? Because, of course, all the public statements are at least from the United States anyway, and from the IAEA is that Iran has not. Oli, you still there?
Oh, well, yeah, I thought that because you said to Chuck, so I was waiting.
No.
Yes, this is the dilemma, because they certainly will not disclose all the details. And we have to leave it. And I don't think that the IAEA can do such an assessment at all, because it doesn't have the resources and access to the information. So we have to look what the powers who have these tools do. It's also multi-source analysis. It's not just reading one newspaper article or talking to one person. They put together procurement, factories, communications, publications, meetings which they follow where the people go. And this comes to the other part, and I finish there. Israel has also hit what people call and killed people which are called nuclear scientists. That's what we have seen. I have gone through CVs and publications and information on them, which is in open source, being able to corroborate most of that. These are mainly people which were involved with the AMAD program, with the exception of the younger ones who have probably been learning from the older persons. They are not really in Atomic Energy Organization, not even the publications. They publish this SPND related institutions, sometimes in universities associated with the military or revolutionary guards. So this is a different group of people. And I think that this is where the concerns are, that what are they doing in such large numbers? And then when you look, detonation, modeling, experiments, etc., these are the ones which have raised the concerns at the same time when people know the big stock of 60% enriched uranium. And I think that I stop here, but I say one more thing. They will continue these strikes, at least for the time being, because Israel has not attacked yet the source of uranium per se. Mines not touched, milling facilities not touched. Some centrifuge manufacturing places, yes. Missile places, yes. I don't know whether they have gone to the high explosive laboratories and things like that, because the publicly available information doesn't explain it. But there are other events which continue, and unfortunately, as far as I know, those also cause some collateral damage, because they are in the areas like these certain laboratories are with the universities, which are in the proximity of a civilian population.
Okay. Thanks so much, Ole. Let's leave it there with you for now. Kelsey, I'd like you to respond to whatever you would like, whether you agree with Ole's analysis, and whether Fordo, in your view, can be left untouched. Doesn't sound like it can be, but I thought it was also interesting that there's so many other possible targets, suggests that even if we have negotiations going on now, this campaign's going to continue for a while.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. Thanks for having me and hosting this event. It's great to join you all for the discussion. I mean, I think Ole gave an excellent overview, and I certainly agree with his assessment on what has been damaged to date and the challenge and risk that Fordo in particular poses given its location. I mean, the question that I raised, though, is given what Prime Minister Netanyahu said about the imminency of the nuclear threat, why have we not seen more focus on Fordo in the early stages of this campaign, trying to damage it or at least disrupt operations there? And to me, that suggests that, the weaponization concerns may not have been as imminent as have been portrayed publicly. And it's given Iran time to divert materials, not only perhaps from Fordo, but possibly other sites, to covert locations. And this is something that Iran has said it was planning for. I mean, Iran alluded to this idea that it would move nuclear materials in the event of an attack in a May letter that was sent to the UN. They've since publicly stated that they have taken these steps. So now there's uncertainty about the status of materials. Prior to all of this, for more than a year, Director General Grossi has been warning about Iran's centrifuges, saying that the IAEA does not necessarily know where all of the centrifuges are, can't necessarily account for them. So we have a scenario where the status of material is unknown, the status of centrifuges are unknown, and there's no IAEA presence at this site. Now at a time when it would be most useful, in my opinion, to have the IAEA there, to have inspections, to determine what's damaged, to try and piece together if anything's missing. We may not see the agency there for some time. I think we're creating the conditions where Iran has retained enough technical capacity that would allow it to move towards nuclear weapons relatively quickly, as Ole pointed out, but also now the political conditions where the decision to build nuclear weapons may become more likely because of the Israeli strikes, and because of the possibility of the United States now kind of entering this conflict going forwards. I also think, in addition to the proliferation risk, there's a question we need to be thinking about now. Some may think that it's premature, but we do need to ask, what does diplomacy and what does a nuclear agreement with Iran look like if we can get to a ceasefire or when this conflict does conclude? Because given what Israel has destroyed, centrifuge production facilities, it's likely some of the stockpiles at Natanz were destroyed, perhaps some at Esfahan. How are we going to have the basis for verifying any future agreements? Even say in the unlikely scenario that Iran agreed to completely dismantle its nuclear program. I said, I think that that's unlikely, but even in that scenario, how would you verify the absence of undeclared nuclear activities, given the challenges posed by these strikes, given what's been destroyed and questions about what's been diverted? So in my opinion, this argues for trying to create the conditions for a return of the agency as soon as possible to these sites. And again, to me, underscores that any strikes on Iran's nuclear program, like I said, may have set back the program temporarily in some areas, may have destroyed some of the infrastructure, but in the long term, proliferation risk is increasing. And Iran may have been able to retain enough infrastructure that it could still move quickly to nuclear weapons. So I think the risk is still quite prominent. And I think, to me, that argues for thinking now about what diplomacy, what verification looks like, because I think it's going to need to look completely different.
Let me ask you, and I posed this to Oli as well, but he didn't reply. Do we have any idea where the 900 pounds of uranium enriched to 60% was before the war started? Was it at Fordo? Did we have any clue? Kelsey, do you know?
Well, Iran enriched to 60% both at Natanz and Fordo. I mean, I would guess that was still some material at those sites. Iran has periodically transferred 60% enriched material to Isfahan, so there may have been some there. I think the important thing to underscore, though, is that the IAEA had accounted for that material. And Grossi had said that they saw no evidence of diversion of that material or of weaponization.
Yeah.
A couple of nuances to this. First of all, IAEA has not perhaps fully verified. When you read carefully the IAEA quarterly reports, they talk about verification of estimates. So we don't have a precise number. But I agree with Kelsey. Most likely they took it in the first place to Fordo. To Isfahan. But here comes but. IAEA has not been monitoring all the locations in Isfahan. For example, we have not seen anything in the old part of research center and nothing reported on this fairly large underground complex, which is in the mountain in Isfahan. So, and then taking into account this letter, which also was sent to the IAEA, most likely they have moved it on safe place. And we have to remember that these are not anything like a big cylinders, This is high-energy uranium. It's most likely in so-called 5A cylinder, which is about this size. That's it. So there are several of them, and knowing the Iranian thinking, they never put all the eggs in one basket.
Okay, thank you. Fatima, it's been a hell of a week. It's been a hell of a 2 years for Iran, but particularly the last week. Tell us how ordinary Iranians are responding to these strikes, and also how government officials are responding. And as we're talking, I've mentioned there are negotiations going on in Geneva. The foreign ministers meeting with the 3 European foreign ministers. There apparently have been talks between the Iranian foreign minister and Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's envoy, some talks going on between J.D. Vance and the Israelis. What is your sense of whether Iran actually could accept some sort of compromise that it was not willing to accept before? Thanks. And you're muted, so unmute. Can you unmute? There you go.
I did. Thank you so much for including me in this very timely and important event. Let me start with the, Iran's leadership. I believe they were genuinely surprised by the recent Israeli strike, and not just tactically, but more psychologically. I think based on several miscalculations, including the fact that they thought, there won't be any Israeli attack while the negotiations were still underway. And some completely underestimated the warning signs. When President Trump called the families of the US personnel in the region, at the time they didn't make much of it, but later they used it as a sign and proof that the US in fact was that the US knew about the timing of the Israeli attacks. What is significant, in my opinion, is this is the first time since Iran-Iraq war that, the military and intelligence sites in central Iran, not just in the border regions, have been struck so directly. And that has clearly shaken the leadership, their sense of security. What we are seeing a week after the initial strikes is now a little bit different than that of early hours. At first, there was visible shock, obviously, but they managed to pull themselves together very quickly. And I believe as the destruction mounted and as the emotions flared, they started regain some ground in terms of rallying support. So what's striking is how fast everything is moving. Unlike Iran-Iraq war in the 80s, there was no internet, there was no satellite TVs, there was no real-time footage flooding the social media. Iranians were not as connected to the world as they are right now. We all know that internet connection has been cut, and even the phone contact is very difficult at this point. But still, I mean, the world is watching, and that is, I believe, is a positive thing, because I remember back then I was living in Europe when the Iran-Iraq war. My entire family lived in Iran, and it was just get some news from them was a major challenge. So that's a positive thing, that the connection still is so good with the world. Comparisons have been made by the regime, with that when Saddam Hussein invaded Iranian cities overnight. And at that time, Iran was isolated like the current situation. And back then, as we all know, was partly due to the nasty hostage crisis and the fact that they thought they attempted to export the Islamic ideology elsewhere. So, but not just the regime, Iranian people have not forgotten, after all these years, that which European country provided Saddam Hussein with weapons, with chemical weapons that were used against the civilians. So that anger hasn't faded. Now, looking ahead, I think the next few days will depend on two important things. First, the scale and precision of further Israeli strikes, if they continue. And second, how the regime communicate with its own population. Will it double down on, defiance, or will it try to take a more measured tone and truly try to rally people around the flag? So there is also the real risk of the internal rivalries that could erupt. We know there are factions within the system that are chewing each other's throat. I mean, and they could be using this opportunity, this time, this moment to undermine one another. What could easily, basically, fracture the already fragile sense of unity is the growing paranoia that is intensifying right now. Just last night, I read, Taslim News Agency, that's a news site close to IRGC, they published a rather dramatic statement. It accused a group of عناصر بدنام, meaning disreputable elements of trying to coordinate with the so-called criminal Zionist regime to weaken national unity. They claimed that a group of disreputable elements are trying to mobilize Qom seminary and clerics and prepare the to surrender and to Israelis and push for and they also, in addition to that, they claim there is a former high-ranking official leading this move. So that could be part of paranoia. That could be also the revenge that with using this opportunity to take off each other. So, but as for ordinary Iranians, there are many echoes of the Iran-Iraq war. People remember how Iran was, how, the cities were attacked overnight. Abadan was a jewel of this in Iran, the city where all refineries are located. The city was destroyed in such a short amount of time, and even now, decades after the war ended, they have not been rebuilt, no proper reconstruction. So that people have these pictures in front of them, and they are not necessarily thirsty for any foreign attacks, and obviously they would rather have a regime change through peaceful and more popular means, not just by foreign attacks. They are, I have to tell you, they are extremely angry at the regime for its brutal crackdowns on the recent uprisings, for the mass executions, for censorship. And, the wounds are really fresh. So, but despite all this, there is a growing sense of needing to defend the country. And with each new round of destruction, I think the feeling of us versus them could grow. We could see a broader rally around the flag effect, especially in the absence of a, major trusted opposition. And, there is no, I don't want to get into that, but about the alternative leadership, unfortunately.
There's no one person you can
what people have, yeah, and I'm sorry if I just stop me if I'm talking too much. And people are scared, the samples they have is Libya, Syria, Iraq, and there is also a belief now spreading that the Israelis' aim is not just changing the regime, but is basically making Iran into a failed state, fragmenting the country. And I think the editorial of Jerusalem Post yesterday, I read it yesterday, could be something that would really make some influence in Iran. This editorial suggested that, arming the opposition, the minorities and opposition groups, and and that's not what obviously people want. And there is also this illusion about China and Russia. Now people are finding out that they would not be counting on their support, on their help, but many people are concluding that Iran has been a low-cost friend for both countries, for these two countries. There is even conspiracy theories mounting, such as that Putin and Trump may have done a deal over Iran and Ukraine. So, I mean, to zoom up, the leadership is shaken, the population is divided, and the future, at least in the short term, feels incredibly uncertain. I will end it here.
Yeah, I think you've summarized it brilliantly. The one other question is, do you think that the leadership will make some dramatic concession, that Aragchi and company, on the issue of uranium enrichment? I mean, Iran has been so firm, so fast, it will never give up indigenous enrichment.
Yes.
Yeah, there was an interview on the BBC with Hussein Mousavian, a former Iranian diplomat, where he said that Iran might accept a multinational or regional consortium for enriching uranium if they put it in Oman. That's the first I've heard an ex-Iranian official talk about something outside Iran. Do you think that that is something that the regime would accept, or are we not there yet? I mean, the Iran-Iraq War was 8 years, and we're only 1 week into this.
I think the reasonable people would agree with that. There are also people within the system engage in the nuclear negotiations that would accept something like that. The problem is that, as I mentioned, the leadership is so divided. There are factions who would believe to get engaged and would welcome a war with Israel to continue. To them, Hamas is winning. They measure how long they can resist the attacks. That goes, obviously, to them, that's more important than the infrastructure that's being, destroyed, and the uncertainty that is threatening the very existence of the country, of the nation. So I do believe there are differences, and as I mentioned with the Tasnim news agency, what happened, I think that is going to intensify with continuing of the attacks, of the Israeli attacks. The differences would widen, and the revenge on each other could mountain. And but definitely there are people who would agree, who would even just give up, the entire program, but not just not to continue until nothing is left. I do believe that there are people who would approve that.
Okay, let me stop you there, because our only speaker who is actually under threat of missiles falling is our next. Chuck, let's talk about where we are. I had some questions about how we got here, but let's talk about where we are. What is Bibi Netanyahu's endgame here, and how is Israeli society holding up? I mean, Israel has not faced missile strikes since, I think, the 1999 Gulf War of this sort. And those were just a few scuds from Saddam Hussein. And Israel has been at war for 20 months since the Hamas attacks. Please unmute yourself. Thank you.
First of all, thanks for hosting this event, and thanks for inviting me. Look, this has been in the making for 30 years, and if you want to make the case, ever since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Iran has called consistently for Israel's destruction ever since 79. And this isn't just rhetoric. They have poured billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars into this. It's the nuclear program, it's the missile program, it was the vast support for Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis and others. We knew that the day of reckoning would come. Did we know that it was going to be Friday the 13th by chance? No. But we knew that the day of reckoning would probably come, and probably because both Israel's reported attempts to sabotage the program have at best provided a gain of maybe some years, but no more, and ongoing or repeated attempts at diplomacy have also not provided for a long-term solution. And even the JCPOA, of which I was a strong supporter of the best of the bad options, was only a 10 to 15 year deal, and 10 to 15 years fly by very quickly when you're having fun. As a matter of fact, we're getting close to the end of that period, or we're well on our way. So I think it was going to happen, and the nuclear talks, which were underway, were stalemate. It was very unlikely that they were going anywhere, and I think that the reason that President Trump has been so supportive of the Israeli actions is because he himself came to realize that actually this could be a case of coercive diplomacy, and here is a case where military action could help achieve the diplomatic goal. And I also think there's a problem with people who are engaged in diplomacy generally, and especially in the area of arms control, tend to become too enamored with the process and with the fact of negotiations and forget that there's an end goal here, which is to stop Iran from going nuclear. And the United States, under 2 or 3 presidents, declared repeatedly that North Korea would not go nuclear. It would be unacceptable. Only it turned out that it happened. It was acceptable because the diplomacy failed. And it was once the Koreans crossed the nuclear threshold, it was too late to do anything about it. So we can argue whether Iran is exactly there now, or they would have only gotten there a few months from now, or a half a year, or a year, or 2 years. But that's the extent of it, if they wanted to. And 2 years is essentially tomorrow in the grand scheme.
Let me stop you for a second, because one of the most potent arguments in the arms control community has been that if you attack Iran's facilities, it will only incentivize them. That they actually will cross the threshold. And if they have squirreled away materials, we might wake up and they might actually have nuclear weapons.
There is that risk. There's always a risk in doing something, but there's certainly a risk in not doing something. And the question is now how I believe that the critical question is what the United States does now. And that starts with Fordo. As far as I'm concerned, it can end with Fordo, but that'll actually be up to the Iranians to decide. I think the American media and many American analysts love to my way of thinking, egregiously overstate the dangers of an expansion of the war, because we always hear that the Iranians will strike American forces in the region, which, by the way, they say they will do, and that they will expand the war by hitting the Gulf states. The one thing that would invite a major American military operation here, far beyond Fordo, is exactly that. As a matter of fact, the one thing that might actually lead to a direct military threat to the regime is that. Because Israel maybe, and I stress the word maybe, can set in motion some processes that might lead to destabilization and theoretically regime change in Iran. Very unlikely. The one country in the world that can do it, or with far greater potential, is the United States. So it seems to me that this would be inviting national suicide from their point of view. And the Islamic Republic is a rather unique kind of regime. It takes its own existence far more seriously than others do. It's a theocratic regime.
Can I ask you, if the United States does not get involved, particularly against Fordo, how long do you see this going? Do you think Israel can continue to degrade, can use some of the techniques that Oli mentioned to incapacitate Fordo, at least for a while? And what about Israeli society? Yes, this is long time coming. Yes, Iran has espoused policies that have put it in this predicament. Certainly that is true. But, Israelis are not used to having hypersonic missiles fall on their heads.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, none have. They're not hypersonic. But that's not,
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter how you die, whether it's hypersonic or just ballistic. Look, you're absolutely right. We have not experienced anything like this since the first Gulf War. And it's already, I think, considerably beyond the damage that was sustained at the time or was close to it. Yesterday, one of the 3 or 4 biggest hospitals in Israel, and the only one in southern Israel, was hit badly. And the Weizmann Institute, one of the great research institutes of the world, was half demolished. And it's just unbelievable. It looks like Hiroshima there. And Tel Aviv has been hit, and other cities around Tel Aviv. So we're paying a price. We knew we were going to pay a price. As a matter of fact, in terms of military estimates, the expectation was that it would be much worse at this point. But here's where the 30-year thing is critical to understanding. There is a wall-to-wall consensus in Israel behind this, okay? Because we've known that this moment of reckoning was probably going to come. As a matter of fact, the latest poll that I saw was 88% of the entire country supports it. And among the Jewish population, it's considerably higher. That 88 is lowered by the Arab. The political opposition, all of the opposition parties in the Knesset have come out in full support of it. Now, then you were asking about Fordo. Look, if this ends with Fordo still standing, then there was something very wrong with Israel's pre-war planning. Bibi either misunderstood the degree of coordination that he had with President Trump, and I believe that there was deep coordination, or he misunderstood or he was misinformed about Israel's capabilities. I'm not going to get into any of the details about what Israel might or might not be able to do. Let me just say that if Israel does not have a plan B here, I'd be quite surprised. But there's no doubt that the plan B doesn't begin to be as good as what the United States can achieve. People sometimes talk about the US and Israel in the same sentence, and we're talking a global colossus and a small regional power. Yeah. But let me, if I may, respond to a few of the things that were said by the previous speakers. First of all, what Fatima was saying, Israel has no desire to turn Iran into a failed state. Okay, Israel's only objective, long-term objective, is peaceful relations with Iran. We've had them in the past, and I think there is great respect for the Iranian people in Israel, not for the government, but for the people. Is there an attempt maybe to destabilize the regime now? Yes. Will some of that undoubtedly create a counter-reaction in Iran? Yes. Nobody, even people, let's say, in the opposition, don't like being attacked by an outside power. That's fully understandable. But the objective, if it is the objective, is regime change. It's certainly not to harm Iran, the country. And then I wanted to respond to 3 things that Kelsey had brought up. She asked, first of all, well, if a nuclear Iran was so imminent, why haven't we seen Fordo yet? And so it's indicating that maybe it's not so imminent. I would offer 3 alternative explanations, which I believe are far more likely. One is, well, wait, the war is just 1 week old. Second of all, there's no doubt that Israel is waiting for the US, hoping that the US will do it because the difference in capabilities is day and night. And the third is maybe Israel can't do it. Okay. The second question, point that Kelsey raised was that is a political decision more or less likely because of an attack? And I think the answer is it's more likely because it's coercive diplomacy. Now, I don't know, this gets actually to the next question that she raised, what will a deal look like? I'll say something about that in a minute. We don't know what it will be, but there is, I think, little doubt that Iran already now, actually probably 3 or 4 days ago, was already far more willing to make, or more willing to make some concessions than it was a week ago, and may, out of desperation, and we see desperation in Tehran, may out of desperation be forced, maybe not into what President Trump in his usual understated manner called unconditional surrender, but how about some significant compromises? Now, one of those compromises might be the consortium idea, which the US had raised in the last few weeks, which the Iranians rejected. It is short of what Israel would like to see. It's sort of what the United States would like to see. But might it be a workable compromise? Absolutely. And then, what is the deal of it? One more sentence about that. To my way of thinking, this war is fought like wars are supposed to be fought for diplomatic purposes. And that is to forge a long-term deal with Iran, because even if it's a 100% effective military operation, if we destroy every last centimeter of the Iranian program, they have the know-how. They have a little bit less of it at the moment, but they have the know-how. They will rebuild it, and the Iranians are nothing if not a resourceful and capable people. Okay, so the final point, if I can, about the...
Very, very quickly, because I want to get to some of our online questions.
I'll stop there.
Okay, appreciate it. I think you've all done a really terrific job. Fatima, you want to respond? Go ahead.
One quick response to Chuck. First of all, I didn't say Israel wants Iran to be a failed state. I just was talking about the sentiment. I truly believe Iran and Israel are natural allies. And the other thing is about the, you also wrote in Haaretz about the consortium. I think the suggestion even came from Iran, that there were differences over where it has to be located, but they would be open. They were open to a consortium like that. And then you also wrote that Iranian rejected the low enrichment. That is, I think, something that originally they supported. They were negotiating about. Just that. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, the idea of a consortium goes back to the Shah.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. So this is, it's a program that started with the US help in 1957. So we have to remember this. You guys have been great. Let me see if I can squeeze in a few questions here. I'll put this one to Ollie, just not to put Chuck on the spot. It's clear that the IAEA only has authority to evaluate signatories of the NPT, of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. It would be appreciated if the panel might consider the fact that Israel, which is not a signatory, is thought to be a nuclear power. Now, my understanding from Stockholm Peace Institute is that Israel has at least 90 nuclear warheads and a second strike capability. So is there any way in which Israel's nuclear program can be brought into this, or will the focus just remain on Iran, Oli?
Yes, certainly there is. And this is UN Security Council, which can see that whatever happens in Israel is detrimental to the world peace. And they can draw a resolution and ask IAEA to act. North Korea is not a member of NPT, but the IAEA is acting and some others are acting based on the UN Security Council resolution. But I don't think it's going to be easy. And the IAEA Secretariat, I don't think can start without any mandate, such an exercise. And I doubt that the IAEA board will approve it. And so I think this is my response to that.
Okay.
I would like
the US would veto it in a heartbeat, no?
I would like to add to that, Barbara. The answer to your question is an absolute 100% or 1,000,000% answer, no. There is no way that Israel's purported nuclear capability will be brought into this for two reasons. First of all, there is no way that Israel will allow it to be brought in. And if that means that the war is prolonged, then the war will be prolonged. It's not a topic for negotiation. And second of all, there's no way that the United States will allow it to be brought in, because the United States has provided Israel with backing against numerous UN and other organizations' attempts to sanction Israel for the purported capability.
Yeah, no, that's what I figured. I have a question from my colleague at Stimson, Chris Preble, and maybe I'll put this one to you, Kelsey. On the issue of the United States entering the war against Iran, does that require a declaration of war, or at least an authorization for the use of force by Congress? Under what authority would President Trump initiate such a conflict?
Well, it's not clear to me that he has the authority right now. There is no authorization of military force from Congress, specific to Iran. I think there is an important debate that we're going to see in Congress in the coming weeks about an authorization of military force and the necessity of one. And I think it's going to be interesting to see this debate play out, because what we're seeing on the Hill right now is not the sort of traditional partisan divide over if or how the United States should assist Israel militarily in striking Iran. And we're seeing, I think, some kind of strange bedfellows. I think there's this wing of the Republican Party that traditionally has supported President Trump that very much opposes any U.S. intervention, any U.S. involvement in strikes on Iran, because that would distract from the America First agenda and sort of that anti-isolationist trend. I think seeing the role of Congress and how that shapes in the coming weeks will be quite interesting.
Yeah, thanks. Fatima, for you, this is a question about how much of the regime's stability rests on having a nuclear program. I mean, when you think of the trillions, probably, of dollars or reals, whatever, that have been sunk into this program over the years and certainly since the 90s, can Ayatollah Khamenei accept such major restrictions on the program so that essentially Iran no longer has this kind of indigenous capacity, just has Bushehr maybe and a couple of other civilian power reactors? Would that fatally undermine his regime?
You know, that is actually the main reason behind suspicion about the Iran nuclear program, because there is really no justification. Iran didn't have any operational nuclear reactor. Even Bushehr wasn't started by Russians when they started doing, building these facilities. Legally, I think Oli can attest, I don't think they violated the international law by starting a nuclear program, even though there was no justification for it. But destroying it the way it is going on right now, I don't know if it would, make permanent change in the relations and in the situation in the entire Middle East. They could eventually have light water nuclear reactors like what the Saudis have in mind, but building or producing nuclear fuel obviously didn't have a justification at that time.
Yeah, could the regime survive this kind of compromise? Could Ayatollah Khamenei drink the poison like Ayatollah Khomeini did at the end of the Iran-Iraq War?
You know what worries me is even factions and personnel within the system who would even resist Ayatollah Khamenei if he wants to give up. I mean, I told you, to them, victory is how long they can resist against Israel. And they would go all the way, I think, even at a terrible price of destruction beyond imagination.
I think a lot of people don't recognize that that there is this element in Iran that is even more radical than the supreme leader. This is something that's often forgotten. And while Israel has killed the top leadership, the top ranks of the military and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, these were older people who were veterans, most of them, of the Iran-Iraq War. And so you have a younger cohort that has never experienced this kind of conflict, and they may not be as ready to accept a compromise. I think that's really important. Chuck, for you, this is a question. It says that certain experts, including Professor Theodore Postol of MIT, believe that even with the so-called bunker buster bombs, the U.S. would find it extraordinarily difficult to destroy Fordo. And there would have to be commando raids. There would have to be something else done. Do you have any view on that?
Well, Professor Postol has been wrong in the past, and I believe that he is very wrong this time. Professional people who oppose certain policies, let's say sometimes their assessments reflect that. The Pentagon has tested the bomb. It seems to work quite nicely. There is speculation today that there might be a need for more than one. We're not talking that many, so it'll be 2, 3, not. not a
Yeah.
big deal.
All right. This is another one for you. A question about whether Netanyahu's main motivation is staying in power. I would imagine it's a motivation. Yeah.
Well, Mr. Netanyahu is nothing if not a consummate politician and a man with a well-developed ego and desire to remain in power. Yeah, of course, that's a motivation for him. And as a matter of fact, it's an important one. But the fact that that may be the case does not in any way detract from the strategic argument. And sometimes you can have two parallel truths at the same time.
Yeah, I think we should also make a mention that as this war is going on, scores of people are dying in Gaza every day. Many of them people who are going to get food from this new Israeli-American project, and that are being fired on and are dying. And I think we should keep that in mind. I have a question here from Faye Muqtadar, an old friend of our program here at Stimson and before and many years back in my previous incarnations. Faye asks, how likely is it that missile technology might also be part of any agreement that's reached with Iran? Obviously, Israel is doing quite a job in terms of attacking missile production sites and launch sites and so on. But is there anyone on the panel who thinks that these talks would be broadened, or is it sufficient to stick with nuclear? And anyone can answer that.
I want to say, I think that it's important to think about this missile program as well. And why I say it, look what was the structure of the Ahmad plan. It was to produce fissile material, design and make a weapon, and have a delivery vehicle. These are unseparated triplets. So as long as you have one missing, the only thing which is missing is that one. So I think it has to be addressed. It's going to be a difficult question because everyone at the same time understands that the country needs a defense system which is reasonable, and how you adjust it in such a way that it is not used for other purposes. And I think that, if I'm looking at European countries, just since I was born in Europe, I don't think that Sweden is very hot over having intercontinental ballistic missiles they have. So I think that this is where the things are, and then maybe some soft monitoring system to make sure that those R&D places in particular don't work things which are not reasonable or which may have other purpose. But it's a difficult question, but it should be on this negotiation. As Chuck said, we need a longer-term solution, not this quick pause and then 2-3 years later somewhere. And then to Fatime, I just remind about the uranium enrichment. It's not about enrichment only. Actually, Iran has very little uranium. You can have a marvelous uranium enrichment plant, but if you don't have uranium to feed, you don't get fuel for your reactor. And I give a number. So until now, Iran has produced about 200 tons of yellow cake during last 10 years or so from its own mining. And they have a reasonable amount of material, maybe 10 times more. So for 10 such batches. 200 tons is actually what you need for one annual pusher reactor reload. That's what it is. So if you build, if you even want to maintain pusher, you need to go to abroad and buy uranium. So why don't you
I'm going to stop you.
the
Forgive me, I'm
others
going to stop you.
and go and buy enriched uranium at the same time?
We only have a couple minutes left. I wanted to know if anyone wanted to make any final points. Do you think the U.S. is going to get into this war? Yeah, Kelsey, let me ask you.
I think it's against Trump's instinct to get involved in the war, but I think he's going to be facing serious pressure from Israel still that will remain regarding Fordo. And I think Israel is very unlikely to allow the conflict to conclude, to support any U.S. brokered efforts to end the conflict, while Fordo is standing. That being said, I think if we could come up with a creative solution, a creative option to think about the Fordo site, I think that would further reduce the likelihood of the U.S. becoming involved.
Fatima, let me ask you if you think there's a way out of this that you can see. And I had a question about Ayatollah Khamenei's fatwa. Do you think Iran will actually now find a way to make nuclear weapons if the regime survives?
If they survive, definitely, because they are also under pressure from the base, from the core supporters, to go nuclear. I hope there won't be American involvement. I hope they will find a way to peacefully resolve this and dismantle or whatever with Iran's nuclear program. But, attacking civilians, Red Cross in Iran and Weizmann Center in Israel, that is not the way to, to take away a program that is very controversial.
Okay, Chuck, you get the last word. Does the U.S. join? Does Iran build a bomb?
Well, I don't know if the U.S. joins, and that will be an American decision, not an Israeli one. And I wish we had the kind of influence over American policy that some people believe that we do. We don't. And I very much hope that this ends and ends rapidly with a long-term agreement that prevents Iran from going nuclear. But if not, this has to be seen through to successful conclusion.
All right. I want to thank all of you for coming today. I know there have been a lot of webinars on this topic, but I think ours has been particularly useful. It certainly has been to me, and I hope it has been to all the viewers. So folks, thank you. There will be a recording of this webinar available on the Stimson website. And again, thank you so much to all of our speakers.